Hey everyone, I'm Phil Albertelli, and this, of course, is The Week in Doubt. On the last Patreon bonus episode, I mentioned that I'd probably be covering this topic on the main show. It involves two things I have an interest in: Star Wars and the occult. I know, I'm weird. When I was a little kid, I loved Star Wars. I had a bunch of the original Kenner toys, etc., and my interest in it kind of fluctuated over the years. It was rekindled a bit by the prequels, and then it probably wasn't until around the release of The Mandalorian, and then during the pandemic that we'd probably all rather forget about, that I started to really get into Star Wars again. I went back and binge watched all the movies and started watching or following all the new Disney Star Wars shows they were releasing, which I guess brings us to the Acolyte in a sense. I was hoping all the negative buzz and predictions would end up being wrong and it would be a good show, but unfortunately, I think sadly it's just another bad, half baked Disney Star Wars show. And I'm a pretty left leaning guy. I don't mind social messaging in my entertainment, as long as it's not so heavy handed that takes you out of the show or interferes with your suspension of disbelief. So it wasn't anything like that. I just think it's a poorly written, sometimes cringe inducingly bad show. And I think Disney Star Wars suffers from a problem of poor decision making, assigning the wrong writers to projects, and not learning from past mistakes. It's wild. But the occult, how's that for a bad segue? Where or how does that come in? I watch a variety of media critics and reviewers just to see what other people have to say about a show I'm watching or a movie I've seen, and I caught wind that a YouTube channel I'm somewhat familiar with, called Echo Base Network, had released a video alleging that there was supposedly occult symbolism in the show The Acolyte. There's two main hosts on the Echo Base channel, I believe. A guy named Nick and a guy who goes by the nickname Coach, which makes sense because his day job is being a teacher and he also, you guessed it, coaches. I think basketball specifically. And it was Coach who did the video on the Acolyte and the occult. And the way Coach talks about the occult, I get the feeling that he's a believing Christian. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I just accidentally, unintentionally quoted Seinfeld. Anyway, I'm just making an observation based on personal experience. I was raised Catholic, but I'm now a non believer, a skeptic, and I can remember growing up in the 80s during the height of the so called satanic panic. And if someone was warning against the supposed dangers of the occult, they were probably Christian. Heavy metal was satanic, Dungeons and Dragons was satanic, yoga was satanic. I even remember, I think it might have been on the 700 Club, but someone was suggesting that the Thundercats were satanic or contained occult references, citing characters like Mumra, etc. Those Mumra transformation scenes were pretty dark, I have to admit. Ancient spirits of evil. That was awesome. How good was that? And I have to admit, as a little kid, hearing this kind of fear-mongering from Sunday school teachers at home on TV, it had an effect on me. I even remember making my parents get rid of a collection of Time Life books on the paranormal because at least one of the volumes had a pentagram on it or in it. But now, as an adult, once again, now a non believer, a skeptic, who nevertheless has a lifelong interest in things like spirituality, comparative religion, mythology, demonology, ooh, spooky, folklore, ancient history, all sorts of weird topics, I have a much different view of the so called occult. I don't have any fear of it, it's just another kind of lurid topic to be studied. And I use the term so called because it depends on what you mean by occult. The word occult comes from a Latin root word, I think it's occultus, and it basically means hidden, as in hidden knowledge, or to conceal. I feel like growing up, people tended to use it as almost synonymous with devil worship, or anything that was kind of spooky or smacked of the supernatural, but in a seemingly unwholesome or unchristian way. Like I was saying earlier, dark heavy metal music, Dungeons and Dragons, even yoga, the Smurfs, Saturday morning cartoons, all sorts of stuff like that was seen as being a cult, or were seen as being occult or demonic. or offering a potential foothold or opening for demonic influence to take hold, you know? And it wasn't that long ago where I was talking about the Smurfs and the occult on the show. I think it was in response to something Cat Williams had said on Joe Rogan. And, sometimes there actually is occult symbolism in things, but I don't personally think it's harmful. In the case of the Smurfs, what I was mentioning specifically is that the wizard Gargamel basically creates Smurfette through a kind of occult or alchemical ritual or process. He fashions her, I think, out of clay and also using an alchemical potion. So she's essentially a homunculus. So sometimes there is stuff like that in cartoons, etc. But Merriam-Webster's has multiple definitions. Maybe I'll read some quickly. Occult, transitive verb, occulted, occulting, occults, to shut off from view or exposure, cover, eclipse, the light of a star that was about to be occulted by Uranus itself. Then the second definition, adjective, not revealed, secret, deep subterranean occult jealousy. Wow, I like that. Then not easily apprehended or understood. Abstruse, mysterious. Occult matters like nuclear physics, radiation, effects in the designing of rockets. I can't believe they mentioned rockets. I'm not going to cover it now, but look up Jack Parsons Jet Propulsion Laboratory Occult. It'll blow your mind if you're not already familiar. Hidden from view, concealed, occult underground passages. Of or relating to the occult arts, astrology, palmistry, card reading. And that reminds me when I was a kid being raised Catholic during the Satanic Panic. We were warned to stay away from anything like tarot cards, Ouija or Ouija boards, even astrology. I remember a Sunday school teacher scared the crap out of us with this story about her and her friends were playing with a Ouija board around the holidays, and it supposedly suddenly flew off on its own, spun around the room, and knocked over a Christmas tree. Do I believe that actually happened? No, I'm pretty damn skeptical, but that was the story. And at the time, as a little impressionable kid, it definitely spooked me. And I'm not suggesting that she was lying. What I think happens a lot with stories like that is that without even fully realizing it, people kind of engage their suspension of disbelief and they make more out of the situation than what actually happened. Maybe someone got spooked and kind of flung the board or something stupid like that, And then it turns into the thing was flying around on its own and knocked over a Christmas tree. And I always thought it was interesting. Over the years, I've also heard the word occult sometimes used in medicine. So here's a definition: not manifest or detectable by clinical methods alone, not present in macroscopic amounts, occult blood in stool. Sorry for the imagery. And here's a couple of definitions that are probably more along the lines of what we think of when someone says the occult. And I think this is from the Oxford Dictionary: supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, practices, or phenomena, a secret society to study alchemy and the occult. That's the example sentence. And there is an overlap between the occult and alchemy, a pretty strong one. And I probably don't have to tell you guys, but alchemy was considered a science back in the day, pretty much. And you could say it's the predecessor to modern chemistry. Here's another one. This is just from Wikipedia. The occult, from Latin occultus, I was right, hidden or secret, gold star for me, is a category of esoteric or supernatural beliefs and practices, which generally fall outside the scope of organized religion and science, encompassing phenomena involving a hidden or secret agency, such as magic and mysticism. And there's an interesting little blurb here from the University of Bristol on alchemy. Alchemy is best described as a form of proto-science, rather than a distinct science in its own right. This is because, although many observations and theories made by alchemists were based on scientific fact, they often explained these in terms of magic or divine intervention. And I think this is from the Oxford Dictionary, the medieval forerunner of chemistry, based on the supposed transformation of matter. It was concerned particularly with attempts to convert base metals into Goya, the Philosopher's Stone, or to find a universal elixir. And then the example sentence, occult sciences such as alchemy and astrology. Anyone remember the anime Full Metal Alchemist? I can never get out of my head that disturbing episode where the guy makes a chimera out of his dog and his daughter. Really disturbing stuff. I think then they put it out of its misery. So if Star Wars wasn't nerdy enough for you, I just brought up anime as well. But anyway, if someone asked me, define the occult, at least in the Western tradition, I'd say it's basically a syncretic stew or bouillabaisse of various systems and traditions: Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Jewish mysticism, including Kabbalah, things like Solomonic and Enochian magic, Rosicrucianism, and like I was saying, there's a heavy overlap between alchemy and the occult. In the 19th century, the spiritualist movement really took off, and you also saw a number of secret orders or societies, magical orders like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn pop up, which notorious British occultist Aleister Crowley belonged to. And if anyone's interested, is probably the longest documentary episode I've ever made. I think it was over 2 hours long. I did a documentary on Aleister Crowley. And it is Crowley, not Crowley. I don't care what Ozzy Osbourne says. Still a good song, though. But I brought up Crowley because around that time, the Victorian era, Orientalism was also very pervasive. And Crowley was not just an occultist, he was also an expert mountain climber. And so he had exposure to Eastern cultures, during his excursions or adventures mountain climbing in the East. And I know he had studied Buddhism and Hinduism in India. And so he and I think others also worked in elements of Eastern spirituality and philosophy into their occult systems. And I know I'm rambling, but before we finally start playing clips of Coach talking about supposed occult symbolism in the Acolyte, I just wanted to say, in fairness to him, he might have, and maybe I'm nitpicking, have gotten a couple of little things wrong, but I was nevertheless impressed with his knowledge of the basic history of the occult. So let's finally take a listen. I've broken the video up into clips, and I'll comment as we go along.
Leslie Headland has revealed, in a manner of speaking, some of the inspiration that she's taken from creating this series. However, she hasn't revealed it all. She did reveal a major inspiration for her creation with the Acolyte, and unfortunately, we're talking about the occult, and I'm about to show you exactly how.
That was pretty funny. He added that devil character from the movie Legend. I think he was just called the Darkness, right? He was played by Tim Curry, aka Pennywise, from the TV series iteration of It, Stephen King's It. I cut the laugh short because I didn't want to get dinged for playing a movie clip. And so Coach says, quote unquote, and unfortunately we're talking about the occult. That's when my radar went off and I thought he's probably coming at this, at least in part, as a Christian, which once again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just my experience that if someone views the occult as a danger, it probably means they're a believing Christian who thinks you shouldn't be messing with anything spiritual or linked to the supernatural that's outside of Christian tradition or belief, or that your particular church warns against. But let's continue.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This one, we're going to go deep down the rabbit hole. This really gets insane. And I definitely understand why Leslie Headland won't come out and say that literally the occult and the Satanic Church is part of her inspiration.
So he says the quote-unquote Satanic Church, and I'm not sure if he means the late Anton Szandor LaVey's Church of Satan or the newer Satanic Temple. I'm not going to be too hard on him for getting the name wrong if he was referring to one of those organizations, because I make mistakes like that too, everyone does. In fact, I used to incorrectly refer to the Satanic Temple as the Temple of Satan. But both the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple are technically atheistic or non theistic organizations. The members don't believe in a literal devil. They more view Satan as a symbol of rebellion, free thought, that kind of thing. But that being said, they do both embrace occult symbolism in a sense. Both use the image of a goat's head and an inverted pentagram as their symbol. This is a symbol known as the Sigil of Baphomet. Anton LaVey adopted it as the official symbol of the Church of Satan back in the 1960s. I believe the church itself was founded in 1966. The Satanic Temple was founded in 2013, I believe. And I don't know for certain, but I've always just assumed that they probably just lifted the idea of using the goat's head in the inverted pentagram from the Church of Satan. And their version, the Satanic Temples, has kind of more of a modernized or stylized look to it. And as you're probably aware, the Satanic Temple also employs full body imagery of Baphomet as well. They've had at least one Baphomet statue made, and I'm going by memory, but I want to say that they've had more than one statue made over the years. And their Baphomet statue, or statues plural, sometimes feature in their legal cases or activist work. And most of their social activism focuses on separation of church and state issues. And there's been a couple of cases where they challenged Ten Commandment monuments being put on public or government property. I think the first time was in Oklahoma, and that was the case that really got them in the news and brought them national attention. And then I think after that it was Arkansas. And I'm just taking a quick look at Wikipedia. It's saying in 2012 there was a Republican politician, Representative Mike Ritz or Ritza, a politician from Tulsa, and it says he privately commissioned a Ten Commandments monument for the Oklahoma State Capitol in Oklahoma City after a previous court ruling dictated that religious monuments may not be paid for with public tax dollars under the Oklahoma State Constitution, which forbids the state from endorsing a specific religion, as it should be. In January of 2014, the Satanic Temple announced plans to also crowdfund and privately commissioned a 7 to 9 foot tall bronze statue of Baphomet to be displayed alongside the Christian monument, both statues being legally classified as quote-unquote donations. I'll jump down a bit. In July 2015, after the litigation of Prescott versus Oklahoma Capitol Preservation Commission concluded with an Oklahoma Supreme Court order to remove the Ten Commandments monument as it violated Article 2, Section 5 of the Oklahoma State Constitution, the Satanic Temple withdrew their request to display Baphomet on public property, as the statue was completed in Detroit, Michigan, just days prior, but had yet to be transported to Oklahoma City. The Satanic Temple also announced plans to install the statue of Baphomet elsewhere. And here's a quote from Doug Mesner, aka Lucian Greaves, kind of the head of the Satanic Temple. The entire point of our effort was to offer a monument that would complement and contrast the Ten Commandments, reaffirming that we live in a nation that respects plurality, a nation that refuses to allow a single viewpoint to co-opt the power and authority of government institutions. Given the court's ruling, the Satanic Temple no longer has any interest in pursuing placement of the Baphomet monument on Oklahoma's Capitol grounds. Arkansas is looking appealing. There are plenty of areas in the United States crying out for a counterbalance to existing graven tributes to archaic Abrahamic barbarism. And I wasn't familiar with this case, but says in 2013, the Satanic Temple petitioned the state of Florida to install a display of Baphomet, Satan, or Lucifer at the Florida State Capitol in Tallahassee during the Christmas season, but their request was denied by the Florida Department of Management Services on the basis of being quote unquote grossly offensive. The proposed display this time says it was a joint venture by American Atheists and the Satanic Temple. It was accepted in 2014 after the Satanic Temple and other civil rights groups threatened to sue. But that's enough of Wikipedia for now. I just wanted to give you a taste of what their activism is all about and what role their Baphomet statue or statues play in it. And as Coach will touch on, the name Baphomet goes at least as far back as the Knights Templar, but the Baphomet symbol that we've probably all seen at some point, you know, the hermaphroditic or androgynous anthropomorphic goat figure sitting cross-legged. It has the head and legs of a goat with the upper body and arms of a human, one arm or hand pointed upward, the other pointed downward. That can be traced back more recently to the 19th century. It was the creation of a French occultist who went by the pen name Eliphas Levi. And the famous drawing that you often see of the Baphomet figure was actually drawn by Levi himself. And if you look closely, you can actually see his signature down the bottom. And I should mention, just for the sake of clarity, that I've heard it pronounced Levy, but I've done research to try to find the proper pronunciation, and from what I can tell, it should be pronounced Eliphas, or actually Eliphaz Levi, so that's what I tend to go with. And I should also mention, I've done a couple of documentary episodes, relatively short ones, on the subject of the Baphomet symbol, so you can find those on YouTube or in my podcast feed, and in those I kind of fluctuate between pronunciations. And despite its bestial or demonic appearance, and the fact that it was partially inspired by the devil of the medieval tarot, the Baphomet symbol for Levi wasn't meant to be an evil or satanic symbol, or to be taken as a representation of the Christian devil. For Levi, it was supposed to symbolize the totality of the absolute, or a union of opposites, which is why it's hermaphroditic, having a kind of blending of both male and female features. The bestial head was supposed to represent the bestial nature of man, or the sinner. And yet, in contrast with that bestial nature, on the forehead is the light or flame of intelligence, with an upright pentacle, symbolizing holiness as opposed to an inverted one, which would signify evil. It was another 19th century French occultist by the name of Stanislas de Guaita, I'm always uncertain of the pronunciation, who came up with the sigil of Baphomet, an inverted star with a goat's head in it. And to be honest, I'm not sure if de Guaita himself referred to it as the sigil of Baphomet, or if that's what Anton LaVey dubbed it when he adopted it as the symbol of the Church of Satan. But in his 1897 book, the title of which, when translated from French to English, is basically The Key of Black Magic, Stanislas de Guaita presents two similar but opposite pentagram images or symbols. One is an inverted pentagram with the goat's head in it, and it actually has the Hebrew letters for the name Leviathan, I think. The, horrible primordial sea monster from the Bible. And for de Guaita, this symbol of the goat's head in the inverted pentagram was a symbol of evil, and it represented matter ruling over spirit. But in contrast to that, he also had an upright pentagram symbol known as the pentagrammaton or pentagrammaton. And inside this upright five-pointed star was a human figure, which, if memory serves, I could be mistaken, possibly represents Adam, and, Adam before the fall. And in Hebrew was the name of the Hebrew name of Jesus, Yeshua, I believe. And it also may have had the names of Adam and Eve. I'm once again going from memory. But this upright star was supposed to represent spirit dominating over matter, and it was supposed to be a good symbol, a symbol representing holiness. But once again, Levi's Baphomet symbol was supposed to represent a union of opposites. And I also mentioned the overlap between alchemy and the occult. And one of the highest goals in alchemy was the bringing together, the union, a union of opposites. And you can see that represented in the image known as the androgyne of Kunrath. And it's also known as the rebus, this human form that is both male and female. But man, I always end up talking about Baphomet. Let's get back to Coach's video.
For creating this series, but it is. And we're going to reveal that with you right here, right now. And I'm going to show you these sources and exactly what we saw in last night's episode that is straight from the occult. But before I show you that, let's revisit something that we revealed back when the High Republic first emerged. The author Claudia Gray created the character for the High Republic, Leox Gaiusy. Does everybody remember Leox? Well, we are the people, we are the channel that revealed to you that Leox Gaiusy is actually an anagram. Leox Gaiusy, if you rearrange the words for Leox Gaiusy, you get Leo X is gay. What does that mean? Pope Leo X was the head of the Catholic Church in the early 1500s, and he's one of the most wicked, corrupt leaders in church history, and he practiced homosexuality with little boys. In fact, history even records that on his birthday for celebrations, he would have little naked boys popping out of a birthday cake. That is straight up recorded history. Claudia Gray never told us that Leox Gaiusy was an anagram for Pope Leo X, but as I looked at the name, I said, wait a minute, and it just hit me immediately.
And so that is absolutely wild. And I have to say, as someone who has an interest in history, I knew that Pope Leo was a Medici pope, but other than that, I didn't know much about him. I tried to do some quick or cursory research, and it's honestly pretty confusing. On the one hand, it seems like the historical consensus is that there were rumors that that he may have been gay or had an attraction to young men, but not necessarily kids. But historians don't seem absolutely certain whether or not he actually was gay. It seems like in his later years and after his death, there were a lot of salacious rumors about him going around. And I think even Martin Luther, who was responsible for the Protestant Reformation, he had traveled to Rome prior to the Reformation. And a big part of his reason for sparking the Reformation and wanting to break with Rome was because he had become disillusioned because of all the papal corruption, etc. And full disclosure, this is just from Wikipedia, but supposedly initially, Luther had described Pope Leo X as having lived a quote-unquote blameless life, but later distanced himself from that claim and alleged in 1531 that Leo had vetoed a measure that cardinals should restrict the number of boys they kept for their pleasure. And it doesn't clarify if we're talking about little kids or teenage boys. Neither is a good situation. And here's a quote, "Otherwise it would have been spread throughout the world how openly and shamelessly the Pope and the cardinals in Rome practiced sodomy." And so I personally have no problem with sodomy, but I do if it's with kids. Jeez. Star Wars and sodomy. All right, I guess this is the road we're going down. And here's something from PBS, and it seems to corroborate what Coach was saying there. It says Pope Leo X had more exotic tastes, and this is just kind of like an informational page on the Medicis or Medicis. famed for his extravagant lifestyle, he was entertained by young boys leaping naked from cakes. When the new pope entered Florence in triumph, he had a young boy painted gold from head to toe who paraded through the streets. It was pure propaganda implying the return of a golden age under the rule of the Medici. The boy died shortly afterwards, poisoned by the gold paint on his skin, but the papal celebrations went on for days. And so that's PBS. I think it's a little weird. They don't provide any citations or sources. But yeah, it's kind of confusing. On the one hand, it seems like there's scholars who tend to approach the matter cautiously and think that we can't even definitively declare whether or not he was even gay, let alone engaging in depraved acts with children. And you know that some of this stuff might just amount to lurid allegations made against him later in life and after his death. And yet, on the other hand, we know that the medieval papacy was rife with corruption and that there were many members of the clergy, including popes and bishops and cardinals, who had mistresses, who engaged in lascivious and licentious sexual behavior, had illegitimate heirs, and who got up to some pretty depraved stuff. And we have historical figures like Martin Luther who suggested that he was corrupt and that he and other members of the clergy seemed to have a predilection for engaging in sexual congress with quote-unquote boys, whatever the ages might be. But prior to watching Coach's video, I had never heard of this whole anagram theory or claim. It's definitely weird. It does neatly spell Leo X as gay without any missing or leftover letters. So definitely interesting. But he, meaning Coach, admits himself that the creator has never come out and confirmed that this is some kind of intentional anagram. So I guess it is possible that it's just coincidence. I don't have any strong feelings either way. But I will say and that's a big if it is some kind of intentional anagram, I think that would be inappropriate. I don't think it would be right to sneak the names of pederasts or whatever into novels belonging to what is supposed to be a family-friendly franchise. There's a lot of unintentional alliteration.
And it's really funny when Star Wars tries to pull the wool over your eyes and hide their inspiration. Well, Leslie Headland totally failed in last night's episode for her inspiration being the occult. Here we go. I'm sure you guys remember this cringe scene right here with the two girls at the beginning of the episode. Well, pay attention to what they say right here. And guys, we're starting with the obvious one.
As above sits the stars, and below lies the sea.
As above sits the stars, and below sits the sea. Commonly referred to as above, as below. Well, what the heck does that mean? It's been a while back now, but the Church of Satan unveiled a 9-foot-tall statue known as Baphomet right here, flanked by two young children. The name Baphomet dates back to the Inquisition and torture of the Knights Templar, about 1,100 who, according to French chroniclers of the Crusades, confessed to worshiping a heathen idol called Baphomet. And you guys see the historical drawing of Baphomet here with the two fingers, I'm not even going to do it myself, but the two fingers pointed up and then the two fingers pointed below, meaning, symbolizing, of course, as above, so below. So you saw the historical drawing. Here is the actual statue of Baphomet, and you got the symbols. You got the hand, as above, so below. You got the flanking of the two children. Does that mean that this is the witch's mother and this is May and Oshi? Maybe. The words as above and so below are very familiar to occultists. The BBC reports that the phrase is also used in relation to science, the universe, and God, but Levi wrote that by making the gesture, his Baphomet expressed the perfect harmony of mercy with justice. Hermeticism is a philosophical tradition based on the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, who is believed to be a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. But it's so much more than all this Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, mumbo-jumbo stuff. This concept has been very influential in different esoteric traditions, and it's also been adopted into modern spirituality and modernism, which is probably where Leslie Headland got this from.
Wow, that was a long one. I think that was like a 2-minute clip. But who am I to talk? It's taking me over a half an hour to respond to a 10-minute clip. Anyway, he's right. As above, so below is a very old Hermetic maxim. It essentially encapsulates the belief that events on the earth mirror events in the celestial realm or in the heavens. He's also right that Hermeticism, which had a heavy influence on both alchemy and the occult, can supposedly be traced back to this legendary figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. And he's also right again that this figure was thought to be a kind of amalgam of or identified with both the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. And that kind of thing isn't that unusual, and it's something I've long been fascinated by, that in the ancient world, when you would have kind of cultural cross-pollination, you could have this kind of religious syncretism where gods from the two different cultures who had similar attributes or who were seen as being identical might sometimes be merged or paired together. And that happened quite a bit with Greek and Egyptian culture, and then later with Greco-Roman and Egyptian culture. And I know I'm getting off track, I was recently listening to a really interesting lecture by British professor Ronald Hutton, and he did a whole talk about this kind of thing occurring when or after the Romans invaded or conquered ancient Britain, resulting in what is known as Romano-British culture. You would sometimes have pagan Roman gods and pagan British gods being merged or paired. Interesting stuff, but anyway. One mistake I think I may have caught Coach making, and maybe I'm just nitpicking, but I think he said that the Baphomet statue was unveiled by the Church of Satan, or the Satanic Church. As I touched on earlier, that Baphomet statue was commissioned and unveiled by the Satanic Temple, not the Satanic Church or Church of Satan. And I have to say, in fairness to Coach, and I keep calling him by his nickname Coach as if I know him personally. Anyway, when I was watching that scene from The Acolyte, I picked up on the same thing. I automatically thought of as above, so below. So you have two guys, Coach, who views the occult as something sinister, and me, who doesn't view it that way and just finds it kind of strangely fascinating, to study. And we both picked up on the same thing. But was that in fact a reference to the occult or the Hermetic saying as above, so below by Leslie Headland or the writer? I don't know for sure, but certainly could be. I guess the other possibility is the fact that the skies above and the seas below isn't really a big-brained idea, pretty rudimentary stuff, and it could just be another example of the show's weak writing, the writer just coming up with this dumb little sing-song rhyme. If it is a nod to the occult, even though I personally don't have a problem with the occult, as you probably realize by now, I don't think, once again, writers should be taking it upon themselves to be sneaking stuff like that into a beloved, established franchise. If you want to tell a story with occult themes, which I think would be pretty cool, write your own original stuff instead of sneaking it into, someone else's franchise. But another thing that Coach got right is, yes, the as above, so below concept is also present in Eliphas Levi's Baphomet figure, one hand pointing upward, the other pointing downward, the concepts of justice and mercy being represented by the two moons the Baphomet figures pointing to, one a white moon, the other a black moon, and these are concepts from Jewish mysticism relating to the Kabbalistic tree of life. And there's the concept of Hesed, which I think is mercy, and Gabora, which is severity, I think. I might be mixing those two up, but something to that effect. He also mentions as above, so below being worked into modern spirituality, and I think quote unquote modernism. I'm not even sure exactly what he means by that, but makes me think of Jordan Peterson and the way he always flaps his gums about postmodernism. Anyway, let's continue.
I've seen a lot of people asking about where the writers got the names for the little girls. Check this out.
Meho Anasea.
Meho Anasea. Anybody? Remember Baphomet, the big, huge statue that we talked about? There are many scholars that believe that Baphomet was created from the corruption of Mahomet. Did you get that? Mahomet? The BBC actually did a really good job breaking all of this occult nonsense down. Right here, some scholars believe Baphomet was simply a corruption of Mahomet, the prophet of Muhammad. So, man, we are talking about where you get your inspiration from. A prophet of Muhammad who was corrupted and turned to evil, and this is where you get your pseudo-semi-god Baphomet that occultists worship today. You got a 9-foot statue. Ironically, you got 2 little kids looking at the statue, praising the statue, and doing the whole as above, so below. What is Star Wars doing? Why is Kathleen Kennedy letting George Lucas's creation go this deep into some seriously nonsensical evil?
So I think he may have gone a little off the rails here. When they say a quote-unquote corruption, they're referring to a linguistic corruption, when the spelling or pronunciation of a word or name gets altered or mangled going from one language to another. Yes, a common theory about where the name Baphomet comes from is that where it came from, is that it may be a corruption of the name Mahomet, which is a variation of the Prophet Muhammad's name. So I don't know where he got the idea it's referring to a corrupt prophet. They're saying it's possibly a linguistic corruption of the prophet's name, of the name Muhammad. So the Templars were an extremely powerful order of Crusader knights, not only powerful militarily, but also financially. They're basically credited with creating the kind of blueprint or model for the modern banking system, and they gained money a couple of ways. One through donations and also through banking. Christian pilgrims would deposit money while still in Europe before leaving for their pilgrimage, and then they would be able to withdraw it again once they reached the Holy Land. And the reason for this was to avoid the possibility of getting robbed along the way. But the Templars amassed a massive amount of wealth, and some very powerful people, including the King of France, owed them money. You could say they got too powerful for their own good. The King of France, Philip IV, had them arrested on Friday the 13th, and yes, that's one theory about why Friday the 13th is considered unlucky, but on Friday the 13th, October 1307, including their Grand Master. They were accused of all sorts of lurid activities, including supposedly worshipping a head or idol named Baphomet. And what's the worst thing you could accuse a Christian Crusader knight of doing? Betraying the Christian faith or going native, embracing Islam. So they were accused of all sorts of blasphemous acts, adopting Muslim or Saracen customs. And it's still not known if they did any of what they were accused of. One theory is the allegations were made up. Another is that they did commit some blasphemous acts, but as part of their conditioning, training themselves to be able to deny Christ outwardly while staying faithful in their hearts in case they were ever captured and made to denounce Christianity by their Saracen captors. If the allegation about rituals involving some head or idol called Baphomet, Mahomet, are true, it could have had something to do with that, but who knows? Along that line of thinking, they could have practiced praising a Mohammedan idol so they could pay lip service to Islam if they were ever forced under, penalty of death to convert. while staying true to the Christian faith in their hearts. Once again, who knows? I don't know what to think. And there's alternate theories about where the name Baphomet comes from, which I discuss in those two documentary episodes I mentioned. One of them is a kind of like alchemical explanation. Do I think Coach is right about them getting that Acolyte character's name from Mahomet? Who the hell knows? Once again, it's possible, but Star Wars names are a bunch of made-up jibber jabber anyway, and Mayho and Mahomet are similar, but not so similar. That's necessarily a slam dunk. One thing I heard last night that's pretty funny is that there's a Canadian soap company, I think it is, called Osha May Soap. The Acolyte focuses on two twins called Osha and May, and the soap company is comprised of those two names spelled exactly the same way. Me personally, I had this horrible retail job right out of high school, and there's a workplace safety organization called OSHA that was always mentioned at work, and I believe it stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So I can't hear that name OSHA without thinking of that.
Guys, Kathleen Kennedy has let people create Star Wars that have totally destroyed it. This show is not Star Wars at all. This show is about a lesbian coven of witches. What are we talking about? Why are we even watching this? It is destined to fail. This is going to fail so bad, it's going to be funny.
Well, I do agree Kathleen Kennedy has been allowing people to destroy Star Wars, but I don't know if it necessarily has anything to do with the occult. And a coven of lesbian witches. Kinda sounds like the plot of a late-night Cinemax movie if those are still a thing. I'd watch it. Anyway, with that being said, I guess I'll call this episode a wrap. And as always, thank you for listening.